now, a dramatic moment in the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the USA, potentially at its lowest point in many a year, because Keir Starmer has paid tribute this afternoon to the 457 British personnel who died and those who were injured in Afghanistan, as he denounced Donald Trump for saying that NATO troops had stayed a little back during 2 decades of fighting against the Taliban. Here's that dramatic statement in full.
Let me start by paying tribute to the 457 of our armed services who lost their lives in Afghanistan. I will never forget their courage, their bravery, and the sacrifice that they made for their country. There are many also who were injured, some with life-changing injuries. And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. And I'm not surprised they've caused such hurt to the loved ones of those who were killed or injured, and in fact, across the country.
And before we move on, let's remind ourselves of what President Donald Trump actually did say.
Always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries.
Well, let's speak now with GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. I've got to say, I don't remember the war of words being this strong between the United States and the United Kingdom ever in my lifetime. Sir Keir Starmer was calm, he was measured about tariffs, about Greenland, but then he was monstered by Donald Trump over Chagos, an act of great stupidity, it was called, and now Sir Keir Starmer has swung back. Chris Hope, it's all kicking off.
Well, it really is. I mean, the week, it's now 5 p.m. Friday. Now, the week for me started 9 a.m. Monday, and I asked our RPM, Sir Keir Starmer, is this relationship fracturing? Is it almost all over for this special relationship? He, of course, wouldn't go there and emphasise the strength of the special relationship and what it means. But by 5 p.m. Friday, literally bookending this working week, it's now looking more shaky than ever. But I think it's important we break down what's happened here. You've got Sir Keir Starmer, he has to take the side of the families of the 457 British troops who died in Afghanistan. He's done that. He said, you can't speak ill of them, Donald Trump. You can't say that they stayed a little back during the 2 decades of fighting. The fighting was brutal. There are amputees all over the country hearing that, deeply offended by what Donald Trump said. But to hear the PM say there, insulting and frankly appalling, and not surprised, of course, such hurt to the loved ones, is simply true. What's different here is he's saying it out loud rather than behind the scenes shaking his head. He's saying to Donald Trump, you can't say this. And if you look at the statement there, it's in 2 parts. He attacks Donald Trump for what he said as an individual, as a leader, but he also stresses the importance of the special relationship. He goes on to say separately, we have a very close relationship with the US, and that's important for our security, for our defence and our intelligence, and it's important we maintain that relationship. So there are 2 things happening here, Martin, in this statement. He's calling out, frankly, offensive remarks by the US President against the families of 457 dead servicemen and many more who are left brutally injured, amputee in some cases from that, calling that out, but equally stressing the importance of the special relationship, because he knows what's on the line here, Martin, and that is that relationship going back decades. That can't wobble. That we can't have on Monday Donald Trump suddenly saying he's going to withdraw intelligence sharing with the UK over these remarks. That can't happen. But for that not to happen, he's had to stress the importance of that relationship.
Out that Kemi Badenoch, Ed Davey, Keir Starmer, everybody's been queuing up to put the boot into Donald Trump, but it is unusual for Keir Starmer to be quite so vocal. I just want to sort of stress something that I feel was important to me as well. I had 4 veterans in this studio this week. You remember that Keir Starmer voted through the Troubles Act. So his government is seen as a government that persecutes and prosecutes armed forces veterans. There's that vote there now. They overwhelmingly voted for that Northern Ireland Tribbles Legacy and Reconciliation Act to go through. An SAS commander, 7 of them wrote to the government. I was sat next to one in the studio. I had somebody from the RAF. I had a paratrooper. I had a Royal Marine Commando in the studio, and they all said they felt this government was uniquely cruel and mean-spirited towards veterans. I just want to make that point before we start, I don't know, saying that here that Keir Starmer is uniquely sticking up for our armed forces veterans. I digress. Let's get back to the tete-a-tete, the contretemps between Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not usually a man to apologise. What do you think happens next?
I don't know, and it depends how, frankly, this is communicated to him, because, frankly, things get lost in mid-Atlantic conversations. For example, the Greenland support that happened last week when we sent UK troops with NATO troops to Greenland. It seems that was misunderstood by the White House as being us making a play against America for Greenland, when, frankly, it was against Russia. So I think things are being lost in translation at the moment between London and Washington, and that can't happen again. But it's quite important, isn't it, that the president, I should say, recognises that if you're going to go have an attack, the sacrifice, and it was sacrifice, and the people of Royal Wootton Bassett, where the bodies were repatriated through the Iraq and then Iran, the Afghanistan wars, they will testify to that. That sacrifice cannot be talked down by a foreign leader, even if it's Donald Trump, even someone as important to this country. And that's why Keir Starmer's calling it out. And he's separating out the attack on him personally to the importance of the special relationship. And that is so important. You mentioned Northern Ireland, Martin. That's a different topic. That's an attempt by this government to try and bring a degree of understanding and peace to Northern Ireland, and there's no question the veterans feel very, very upset and isolated by this Labour government. But on this one, I think the PM looks like he's speaking for the country.
OK, thanks for joining us on a huge, dramatic afternoon, a closure to the week. And that's GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Had a fantastic week. Thanks for your company, as ever. Well, for reactions stateside now, let's get straight to Washington, D.C. Of course, let's speak to our man there, and that's the host of The Late Show Live, the presenter, Ben Leo. Ben, welcome to the show. It's around about midday there in D.C., right? America is just kind of getting a grips, no doubt. This statement will be filtering through stateside. Has it had any impact there yet? And more to the point, do you think Donald Trump is the kind of man to apologise to somebody like Sir Keir Starmer?
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Yeah, hi Martin, hi viewers and listeners. I'll be honest, it's not really cut through this side of the pond yet. I don't think people are really aware, and I don't think President Trump probably is aware just yet about the ramifications his comments are having back home in the UK. I have gone to the White House this morning to make them aware of Sir Keir Starmer's statement this morning. And boy, oh boy, wasn't it a stern statement. He seems to have found his big boy boots in the last couple of weeks when it comes to President Trump, not least talking about Greenland, standing up in Parliament and standing toe-to-toe against President Trump. A damning statement. It was an insulting statement, but the defence is on social media from some Americans this morning, including some armed forces personnel, is that President Trump wasn't including the UK when he was talking about NATO. I don't buy that at all. I think he was just talking about NATO. But if that is the case, that at best you can blame President Trump for being very sloppy with his language, because as you've said, 450 odd British service personnel died in Afghanistan, many on the front lines. I had mates who were blown up personally in tanks fighting alongside US forces in Afghanistan. There are now calls, and by the way, when I get that statement from the White House, that response, I'll bring it to you. But there are now calls from the likes of Daily Mail journalist Sarah Vines saying, look, King Charles is the head of the British Armed Forces. He's due for a big visit to the United States, to Washington, D.C., to see President Trump in April. There are calls now for the King to boycott that visit. I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. And also Sarah Vine mentioning about boycotting the World Cup. Again, I think that's a gross overreaction. But what is clear is that President Trump's comments were insulting. Whether he meant to include the UK or not when he was referencing NATO is kind of beyond the point, because he said what he said and he's caused a lot of hurt and upset to people in Great Britain. And I will say as well, 457 British service personnel died in Afghanistan. 2,461 Americans died as well. But when it comes to the deaths per population of each country, so how many army or military personnel deaths per 100,000 of the population, we weren't that far behind America. America had 0.73 killed per 100,000. We had 0.67. So if President Trump was including us in his comments, the reality is we weren't that far behind in terms of the tragic number of lives lost, or at least sort of per capita anyway. But yeah, as soon as we get that statement, Martin, from the White House, that response to Keir Starmer's comments, we'll bring that to you. The Royal British Legion actually as well, just breaking in the past couple of moments on X, have said the service and sacrifice of British personnel in Afghanistan cannot be called into question, and we condemn any comments that undermine their extraordinary contribution. So yeah, more as we get it from the White House, Martin, but I don't think it's really cut through just yet. I'm sure by the time the Late Show Live goes on air tonight, midnight UK time, hope to see lots of you there, we will have something more concrete. But the defence, as I said, Martin, is that maybe President Trump wasn't including the UK in his NATO reference, but either way, not a good look.
Okay, Ben Leo, thank you very much for joining us there from Washington, D.C. We look forward to getting that statement. And, of course, Late Show Live on GB News tonight from midnight. Ben Leo, superb as ever. Let's get to our Homeland Security editor now, Mark White. Mark White, welcome back to the show. A hugely significant story, and the special relationship being very, very strained today.
Yes, there's no doubt the special relationship has been tested without a doubt. And it is because of that special relationship that actually so many British service personnel have been killed on operations alongside their American colleagues. Remember, of course, it was after 9/11 that the US invoked Article 5 of that NATO treaty, asking for the support of NATO members. Front and centre was the UK, right in there in very significant numbers, going into Afghanistan with the US on the first day in there. And throughout the time that the British armed forces were in Afghanistan, some 20 years, more than 150,000 British personnel served in Afghanistan. We've heard that figure of 457 who were killed. Another figure that's just as stark is the more than 2,000 who were injured, often very seriously, losing limbs, terrible burns, psychological scars as well that they still live with today. I remember reporting from Wootton Bassett, now Royal Wootton Bassett, on some of the many repatriations of those who had died in Afghanistan during a period in particular of a few years when the British were based in Helmand province in the south of Afghanistan. Now, Helmand, for those that don't know, was one of the most brutal provinces in Afghanistan in terms of the fighting, based out of Camp Bastion, but in towns like Lashkargah, Sangin, also Musakala. We had the British out there in bases coming under attack on multiple occasions every single day, and that's why there were so many British casualties there. So I think when we hear words from President Trump about NATO forces being out there but being further back from the front line, it cuts and it hurts people that know that we're out there themselves, that know people that were out there, that have family members that have been impacted by this. And that's why I think there's no way that Sir Keir Starmer could have done anything other than come forward with this very significant and impactful on-camera statement.
Okay.
It was interesting listening to Christopher Hope about, how conversations can be lost mid-Atlantic. Well, this can't be lost. It's there on tape. He is calling President Trump's words appalling. Yeah. That will be played in the fullness of time in the US.
Mark White,
President Trump and others in the administration will hear and see that.
I have to interject there because actually it seems that has had some impact. I think there has now been a response from the White House. Let's get back now to Ben Leo, our man in Washington, D.C. Ben Leo, you have that response from the White House to these dramatic comments. Far away.
Yes, I went to the White House specifically with Keir Starmer's statement. I said, look, is there some confusion here? Was President Trump not including the UK when he was talking about NATO troops not being near the front line? This is their response, breaking now to GB News from the White House. They have said, President Trump is right. America's contributions to NATO dwarf that of other countries, and his success in delivering a 5% spending pledge from NATO allies is helping Europe take greater responsibility for its own defence. The United States is the only NATO partner who can protect Greenland, and the President is advancing NATO interests in doing so. So that's just breaking now from the White House. I went to them specifically with Keir Starmer's comments. I gave them the full statement, and I said, guys, is there any kind of miscommunication here where President Trump, as some people were saying, wasn't including the UK in the NATO comments? And that was their response. I'll read it one more time. President Trump is right. America's contributions to NATO dwarf that of other countries, and his success in delivering a 5% spending pledge from NATO allies is helping Europe take greater responsibility for its own defence. The United States is the only NATO partner who can protect Greenland, and the President is advancing NATO interests in doing so. A pretty sturdy response from the White House there, doubling down, saying that there is no confusion. President Trump meant what he said. And when you talk about America first, it really is America first. President Trump, his comments could have been, as I argued a few minutes ago, misconstrued last night. The conjecture was maybe he wasn't including the UK in his NATO comments. But no, the White House says he was right and he meant what he said, Martin.
Ben Leo, I wonder if